Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
Hi guys, I'm Courtney.
And I'm Lisa.
And we are the hosts of The Book of the Dead, a true crime podcast based out of New Jersey, where we tell you about the most obscure cases that you may have never heard of. So join us in the Book of the Dead library for another chapter of the Book of the Dead wherever you get your podcasts. Bye guys.
Devil is on his way, devil is on his way, devil is on his way, motherfucker, the devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way. Fall to your knees, devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey, y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good.
Good.
Pretty good.
I'm glad somebody's good.
All right, yeah. Hey, thank you, holidays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just glad to be here. My Discord fam knows what I'm talking about. Didn't think
Okay.
I'd make this episode.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but I'm back.
You are.
I am for now.
I'm not welcoming you back, but you're back.
That's all right.
That's okay. I made a list and I put it on the fridge. And folks, if you have a partner who does stuff sometimes and you have to weigh out instead of like pros and cons. So I have an assets versus liability list, right? And Dylan is number one under liabilities.
Whoa, no. I think I moved down to 2.
You moved down to number 2, but Dylan, there's always a chance you're going to go back up to number 1.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And you don't want to be the number 1 liability because you know what
no.
happens to a liability. After a minute, people cut their losses.
They just write you off.
I'm going to write you off.
No.
So you best find your way down the list and over to the assets.
Okay, now I told you
You've been warned.
You can't keep moving the goalposts.
It's a new year. It better be a new you.
You have to stick to the rules of the asset liability list.
You have to stick to the rules or you will stay on the liability side.
I am here and I'm on my best behavior and I cannot wait for this story.
I even made the asset liability chart Dylan's wallpaper on his phone. So every time he opens his phone, he can be reminded that Dylan is the number 1 liability.
Well, number 2.
For
At the
now.
moment.
For now.
Yeah.
But I'm not holding my breath.
I got this.
You know, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but these holidays, bah humbug. Yeah, and can I just get into why they make me feel bah humbug?
Girl, in general terms,
Because of my fucking family.
you can express all you want. And I think a lot of other people will know where you're coming from.
Because the worst part, for some people, they're like, oh, the holidays are great. I get together with my family. And for you people,
Those people.
I am envious. You know, I truly wish that I had a somewhat functional family.
That was quote unquote normal.
That maybe just were loving,
You look
supportive, kind,
you
caring.
look forward to seeing them at the holidays.
But here's, just in a nutshell, I'm going to just give you the rundown because I'm telling you today, I'm like the audacity, Dylan, the audacity of these people. So I'm not going to name names and I won't go into specifics, but let's just say I have this one side of my family and they're just fucked.
By fucked, you mean super dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they're just fucked. Okay. Like somebody left the damn nuts in the oven a little too long. Somebody done scorched the chestnuts. You know what I'm saying? So they're just fucked. And all they do is shit on me like all the time. But then come Christmas, they have expectations of me. Like they're going to make demands of me and I'm going to just go along with it when they've shit on me all year. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not here to facilitate you having a good holiday. That's not my fucking problem.
Right.
Just the mental gymnastics it takes to get from point A to B, I guess. I feel like somebody deserves a gold medal because I just can't even.
And taking the gold medal in the mental gymnastics is those people.
Those fucked people over there. Yeah, exactly.
The way I frame it is they want to bury the hatchet while they still hold a hatchet in their hand.
Oh, they want you to bury
it's
your
one-sided.
hatchet.
Yes.
They're going to hold 10 hatchets.
Yes.
And you're going to do what they say.
Yeah.
Hell no. I'm
And
like, do y'all know me at all?
if you interact with them in any form or capacity, be it Jesus' birthday or not, they one slip up and they're ready to strike because you came within their striking distance. That's the type of people you're dealing with.
Yeah, I'm not setting myself up for this. No way. I don't care.
Best way you can avoid being bitten by a rattlesnake is to stay the fuck away from rattlesnakes.
Oh, I'm getting the hell away from that den. I done boarded it up and closed it up. So yeah, I'm not having the best holiday cheer at the moment, Dylan, but I am so glad to be here discussing true crime now that I've ruined everybody's day. No, but I think there probably are some other people out there who can understand and relate to that experience because some of us are just, I guess, born unlucky.
Well, no, I think there's more than you could imagine that actually understand where you're coming from on that in some form or capacity. And to all the regular folk who don't have any issues like this around the holidays, I wish you the best.
Good for you.
Enjoy your family. It
Yeah,
could be way
you should
worse.
really wake up every day and thank your lucky stars that you have decent parents who are kind and loving and supportive and are not horrible narcissists. And I don't even know. That could star in Mommy Dearest's Holiday Hell Feast or something.
That could be a whole nother podcast.
I mean, it really could.
All right, but I cannot wait. Heather has a huge story for us to dig into.
Well, otherwise, Dylan, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Doing good.
Good.
Putting along. Just to add a little bit more bright sunshine and rainbows on top of what you said. Think I'm depressed. Just now processing fully having lost my job. The other thing I'm doing for money, it's working, but it's real hit or miss, feast or famine. So that every time it's famine, it sends me into a tailspin. And other than that, I'm doing great.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
Happy holidays,
You have a
y'all.
choice to make.
Yeah.
Is that you can continue
No.
doing the thing that sends you in a tailspin, and or you could just be regular and get a real job. Just saying. Okay, moving along.
Well, yeah. I mean, those are the choices that need to be made.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
you know, Dylan, it's like sometimes the choices you make cause the problems you have, and then sometimes the problems are out of your control. So I always look at it from, do I have control of this situation? And if I do, how can I fix it? And if I don't, and it's beyond my control, then I just kiss my ass and hope for the best. You know, put your head between your knees and kiss your ass and hope it works out.
We were talking about personal responsibility the other day, as we do a lot, because we feel like everything comes down to that. And even I said, I think, a very nice little tidbit of wisdom. Even if the circumstances are out of your control, you have a choice of how either they A, affect you, or B, you keep interacting with said circumstances, or just walk away.
Exactly. So if you keep doing the same thing when you interact with those circumstances, somehow that will end you up on a liability list in the number one spot.
Oh shit! Then number one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you gotta work on it. I have to say, despite everything, I think we're doing better than the people we're about to talk about in
That's
today's story.
generally true here at Mount Murders because we talk about true crime and death.
We do. Dylan, are you ready for today's case? We've already bummed everybody out, so they're in the perfect mood to listen to this seriously awful story.
Yes, I think I will try to bring in a little levity later on.
Okay, we're going to be talking about Cleveland, Ohio. You ever been there?
I have not been to Cleveland. I have been in Ohio.
Cleveland, Ohio was an area hit hard by the Great Depression. And I just want to set the stage for our story today, give you some background. I am going to go ahead and mention this is a really brutal story, horrific, some of the details quite gruesome.
True, it's true.
I will skip over some of the worst, but I will be discussing some things today that if you got a weak stomach or you don't want to hear gory, gruesome stuff, you might want to skip this episode. It's going to be a two-parter because there's a lot of information, Dylan.
Now, I must say I'd heard of this before, this case, but I had no idea of the era that it happened in, which is very important, I think.
I think so.
And some of the other components as far as the investigators involved, I had no idea. So this is a huge story.
Yeah,
let's get to it.
It's a very fascinating case. So let's get into it. Again, Cleveland, Ohio hit very hard by the Great Depression. By 1930, Cleveland was considered the 6th largest city in the United States with a population of just under 1 million. I had no idea that Cleveland was so huge at one time.
Yeah. But like I said, when you were discussing this with me, a lot of these towns, industrial towns typically, and boom towns were the centerpiece in a lot of states and port cities and things like that.
41% of workers were employed by the city's industries, which were diverse. The auto industry, machine tools, and industrial equipment thrived in the city because iron was important at the time. Transportation played a role in the area as well. The development of the shipping on the Great Lakes, the completion of the Ohio and Erie Canal in 1832, the later construction of railroads, and the more recent constructions of major highways and airports allowed Cleveland to receive a large flow of raw materials and to ship out finished products.
Yeah, the canals, if they have a set of locks, very important to something like this because it allows ships and materials to change elevation and continue on their way. It's a big deal.
Just to show a bit of the diversity in the town, Dylan, Sherwin-Williams had a paint factory in town, along with other thriving businesses like Chaz Brush, which was an electrical company which was absorbed by General Electric. And they had actually been responsible for some of the first electric railroad or electric train cars, subway type of cars in Europe and places. The economic shock of the Great Depression rattled through the United States. And I think today we really don't have, we've been through recessions, but I think our generation and those younger than us and maybe even a little bit older than us, they really don't know the extent of the Great Depression or how just badly it affected people.
Yeah, I would agree with the economic downturns, huge ones like the Great Depression. I think we're still kind of protected and insulated from these types of things. Even the pandemic, I'm sure, will go down as a big moment in this generation's life and everyone that lived through it. But it wasn't as bad as it can be and as bad as it has been before. The same can be said for war.
Yeah, we don't have soup lines, bread lines. We don't have people, without a home. I mean, we have unhoused population, but it's not like it was during the Great Depression where everybody loses their home and there's no place in sight for you to go.
No, and the only people that didn't seem to notice were the ultra poor already. They were so poor, they didn't notice.
Yeah, I remember being a kid and asking my great-grandmother, who, of course, grew up here in very rural Western North Carolina at the time, farming family. I asked her, if she remembered the Great Depression and what it was like. And she said, we really weren't that affected by it because we were so poor we couldn't tell that we was still just eating, potatoes that we planted. So we didn't see a change.
We were still fattening up the one pig and cow we put away for the winter.
Yeah,
in the freezer.
We was still eating taters every night. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting.
And I think the same could be said for war. Could you imagine if the new iPhone couldn't come out because they needed those metals and precious materials?
Well, we've never, as a nation, not since the World War II, have been asked to give of ourselves. We have not dealt with gas shortages, rationing. We're very spoiled as a people. We really are. I have a feeling we're about to fuck around and find out, though.
Yeah, I think something's going to happen.
Well, the collapse of the construction industry began, which employed about 2 million people, which is like the population of Nebraska. And those jobs went away. And the second downfall kind of came with general downturn in industry period, especially like heavy manufacturing. You got to think about steel in places like Pittsburgh and Gary, Indiana. Automobiles in Detroit took the heaviest hits, along with railroads and coal mining. Cleveland was also struggling, Dylan. By January of 1931, nearly 100,000 people were out of work. And as the years dragged on, the situation grew much worse. Over half the workforce had been laid off in 1933, and those who were still fortunate enough to hang on to the few jobs available saw pay cuts of up to 50%.
Wow. So you get to keep your job.
But you have to be willing to take half your pay.
And still do all the same work. And you'd be happy to have 50% of your pay instead of, your buddy might have 0%.
Exactly.
Wow.
Minorities and immigrants were impacted the deepest because they were the first to get laid off, first to get fired, first to be canned, right? And so a lot of these people, especially like immigrants, maybe they weren't so great with speaking English. I mean, there were a lot of roadblocks in the way for them. And that's going to kind of come into play in our story today, Dylan. Philip Porter, who was an editor at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which was a news publication, at the time wrote, quote, "Anyone who had even a small amount of cash was lucky. Travelers were stranded. They could not get money for their traveler's checks." It was a dire situation.
So you could be mid-route traveling because we have to remember travel took weeks, even months, depending on how you're traveling or where you're going. And then all of a sudden you can't cash in your traveler's checks because the banks are basically defaulted across the board.
Yes.
Wow. That would suck so bad.
As the numbers of joblessness climbed, churches and charities were overwhelmed. The federal government was providing some assistance, but it was not enough to provide food and shelter for everyone. Kingsbury Run refers to an area along the east side of Cleveland. And from what I gather, it's near Shaker Heights. Again, I don't know a whole lot about Cleveland, but I do know something about Shaker Heights.
There apparently was a battle there.
Paul Newman's from there.
And Shia LaBeouf was the general.
Meow.
One of the early Greenlight projects from Matt Damon and Ben Affleck was the Battle of Shaker Heights. And it may have been the first time I was introduced to Mr. LaBeouf. LaBeouf. How you say his name?
Shia LaBeouf.
LaBeouf. Okay.
I guess. I don't know.
I thought it was a good little movie.
Well, all I know is that Paul Newman's from Shaker Heights.
And
Paul Newman is all that is man. He is gorgeous.
I think Heather would put Mr. Newman down as the most man in her life that she's ever been exposed to.
He's perfect.
Yeah. A young Paul Newman's rather handsome.
Very. And old Paul Newman says, "Should I take a damn decomposing Paul Newman?
Oh my gosh.
I'll damn take some skeletal Paul Newman. What are you talking about?" So Shaker Heights, that stretched westward through Kinsman Avenue and down to the Cuyahoga River. It also included a natural watershed that runs through East 79th Street in Cleveland, where natural creeks drain stormwater into the Cuyahoga River from areas that are now known as Warrensville Heights and Maple Heights. I'm sure we have some folks in Ohio who know exactly what I'm talking about. The name Kingsbury Run comes from James Kingsbury, the first inhabitant of Newburgh and one of the first settlers of the Western Reserve area. Colonial settlers, colonizer settler, Dylan. In the late 1800s, the city commissioned a new sewer tunnel system project, and this was constructed to pass through the Kingsbury Run area under Kinsman Avenue. Industry once boomed in this area, including the crude oil refinery belonging to your favorite person, John D. Rockefeller.
Oh my gosh.
And the oil and naphtha works of William Halsey Doane.
What I'm hearing is industries, especially back in the day, that would have been polluting the living hell out of the environment.
Oh, it did.
Including the river.
And from what I understand, yeah, for some years they had serious problems with the water in this area.
Yeah, these are types of chemicals and stuff that takes a very long time for it to kind of go away.
So industry was thriving until it didn't. You like that?
That's how it works.
However, the 1930s saw a rapid decline in the neighborhood. It became crime-ridden, an industrial wasteland among railroad tracks. Not only poverty-stricken, but the inner city was lined with tenement buildings, bars, gambling dens, and brothels.
Oh my gosh.
I know where you would be, Dylan.
I would be at all those places, making sure everybody has a good time.
Yeah, I know you would.
Just checking it out.
Transients, or hobos, as they were called back then, made their way into town by hopping boxcars in search of work. Yet those people had no place to live and usually found that work was scarce. Vagrants set up shanty towns in Kingsbury Run called Hobo Jungle and in another area called the Roaring Third.
What? Hobo Jungle?
Yeah.
Sounds cool till you get down there and see what it is.
Oh, it does not look cool. I mean, these were ramshackle constructed, I wouldn't even call them houses. They're
Right.
like lean-tos made out of whatever abandoned materials that were found.
Trash.
And you had people, families, living in these shanties.
And now you can see these off of almost every major interchange and exit in Asheville.
Those are called tents, honey. Those are called camping tents.
You seen a full-on shantytown building.
I have to say, I was at Trader Joe's and I was parking my car. I get out and I hear there's like a little overgrown kind of lot next door.
Right.
And I could hear voices like someone having a full-on conversation over there. And I was like, what is going on, right? Am I losing my mind? I look around and then I see some people have built like a little lean-to. And it was, you know, the like the closet doors.
Right.
I don't even know what you'd call
Oh,
those.
the ones that are like
The folding, like
Yes.
accordion style closet doors with the little slats, the wood slats. See, somebody out there is yelling at me because I don't know the name of it. Like those, and then there was like an actual front door, and then some wood, and it was just all piled up. But they
so
had
just
them-
random stuff cobbled together.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, that's pretty innovative.
Well, it is.
It reminded me of something I built when I was a kid, and I wanted a tree house, but my parents wouldn't get me a clubhouse, so I just built one out of shit I found in the yard.
My first thought would be, where did you get the fasteners to cobble this stuff together? Okay.
So most working poor stayed in these Hoovervilles, as they were called, or shantytowns. Cleveland Flats was an area where mostly like the families and working poor stayed. It seems like maybe Kingsbury Run was more like the hobos, the winos,
So during this era, you have the recession, Great Depression
the good
setting
time
in.
guys. Yeah.
In these types of places, it's not going to be your normal transient hobos, people living that life, you know.
Well, you have some of those
spirits.
people
But you also have regular folk
just looking for work.
who have either lost everything or come here to find something because they lost everything somewhere else. So you have whole families staying in some of these shanty towns, if you will.
Well, of course, there was no sanitation. These areas were dirty, diseased, and the makeshift homes were built from scraps, as I mentioned before. A dark, dangerous place, which was the perfect hunting grounds for a serial killer, Dylan.
I couldn't think of a better place for them to be able to hunt victims. And it's also an entire population of what we would, society sometimes considers throwaway people.
Now, let's talk a little bit about a name you might know. We're going to discuss him a bit here in the first episode, but part 2, we're really going to dive into his role in this investigation. And that is Elliot Ness.
Can't touch this. Doom, 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 doom.
He is an untouchable.
Doom, doom. That was a good movie.
The Untouchables?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant the Elliot Ness, the biography that you're writing called Can't Touch This.
Oh, I think somebody already did that.
He was a famous prohibition agent who graduated from the University of Chicago. Ness idolized his brother-in-law, Jamie Alexander, a Scottish immigrant who worked for the Bureau of Investigation. So not exactly the FBI yet, but this is in the very early days of the what would become FBI, which was a new breed of law enforcement. Ness was inspired to follow in Alexander's footsteps. So in 1930, Ness most famously led an assault on Al Capone, handing down a massive conspiracy indictment which linked the gangster to 5,000 prohibition violations. Ness was called uncorruptible. At one time, Capone had offered Ness $2,000 a week to keep quiet, the equivalent of about $37,000 a week by like today's money.
Oh my gosh. Elliot wasn't having it.
No, and you already told me that you would be the first to be like, hell yeah, I'll look the other way.
I'd be like, look, man, I don't want you to do crime, but I mean,
$37,000 is a lot of money.
$37,000 a week, bruh, in these tough times? Nah, I'm just kidding. Well, there's a reason I'm not a law enforcement officer. I don't think I have the temperament, for one.
You have no integrity and no ethics. I see that.
Well,
Now,
no, I have integrity.
You do?
Yeah, but 37,000 is going to break that integrity down.
Let's see. You don't have a lot of integrity.
Well, yeah, I have 37,000 a week worth of integrity.
Oh, so anything less than that,
Oh yeah, I'm not taking
you'll
it.
be ethical. But anything beyond 37 is the number.
Well, I mean,
It's good to know, Dylan.
Well, yeah, at least my bar is really high. Nobody's going to offer me $40,000 a week to keep quiet
Somebody might.
in the modern day.
A friend described Ness as, quote, honesty that amounted to almost a fetish.
So even other honest men are like, kind of think Elliot Ness is maybe more honest than them. I don't even know how to say it.
The most honest of the honest, Dylan.
He's the most honestest of the honest.
Like if there was a list of like honest, assets, liability, he's going to go on the asset side, Dylan. Right, number one next to your liability listing. See what I'm saying?
Okay.
You're like equally ranked on opposing sides.
So he's as much an asset as I am a liability.
Yes.
What? Damn, bro. That means I'm like the biggest liability next to the biggest asset.
Well, since we're talking about the Prohibition era, Dylan, you are public enemy number one.
That's not true.
In my household. Now, a friend described Ness as I said, honesty that amounted almost to a fetish, which is a very strange way of discussing his friend's honesty.
I guess he was
But
just trying to
it's
make
like
a point.
I get it, right?
Yeah.
Now, Ness and his team became known as
The
Untouchables. You nailed it, Dylan. In 1932, Ness was promoted to chief investigator of the Prohibition Bureau for Chicago. Following the end of Prohibition in 1933, he was assigned as an alcohol tax agent in the Moonshine Mountains of southern Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Now, you can imagine how well that went.
No, that's a very dangerous work. You're up in the holler by yourself, typically.
Well, the thing is, you got somebody who's like, oh, I've been dealing with these gangsters up in Chicago. They don't know nothing about no moonshiners. A revenue man go missing real quick.
Well, it's the thing. You're out in the country. You're in a very rural setting, dealing with people of very close-knit communities.
We don't like outsiders.
Oftentimes, 2 or 3 families, everyone's basically kin in one way or the other, and they don't care for outsiders.
And you messing with their money, you messing with their emotions.
And everybody notices you. You stick out like a sore thumb.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of backup, and there you can disappear up the gravel road.
It's a good way to get got.
See, a lot of people think that the urban setting's much more, and in ways it can be, more dangerous. But when you get up a dirt road or gravel road, miles from the pavement, and the pavement's in the middle of nowhere.
When you're in an area that takes you an hour to get down the mountain and into town,
yes,
yeah, them places you don't fuck around because you'll find out.
I didn't even consider the time period. Many of these roads would literally be dirt roads, full of mud holes.
Yes.
The pavement would end in town.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's true.
So it takes some guts to do that kind of work.
We have been to areas here in our neck of the woods that are these types of places.
Oh, yeah.
In today's times, 2023. And when you drive through these areas, you got some old timer on his porch with a gun looking at you like, who you and where you from? You don't belong here. Even though you're on a road that is accessible from the highway. But they don't want you messing around.
No, there's still pockets of communities just like that in 2023. 4, basically.
Yeah. So in 1934, Ness was transferred to Cleveland, Ohio. In December of 1935, Cleveland Mayor Harold H. Burton hired Ness as the city's safety director, which put him in charge of both the police and fire departments. Ness soon began a reform program within the departments after finding there were problems such as no cohesion among the various departments. Cops were drinking on the job, laziness, incompetence, and a general lack of concern for the job.
And that is not going to work for someone like Ness.
No. Many detectives were promoted because they paid for the position. So at the time, if you wanted to be promoted, all you had to do was pay off the right person and suddenly you got a promotion. Even if you didn't test well, you didn't have the skill, the background to be promoted, you could buy your promotion within the department.
Wow, that's a lot like the Catholic Church that started letting people pay for their loved ones' sins after they die. You basically buy, like, it's much like the carbon credits.
Oh, I remember that.
Scheme. It's the sin credits.
I remember learning about that in history class many a year ago.
I've always thought that was didn't work for me. Didn't make sense.
So Ness wanted to, quote, clean the enemy out of our own camps. Under the former mayor, Harry Davis, who had been corrupt and ineffectual, the Cleveland Police Department degenerated, becoming a safe haven for organized crime. Mayor Burton was hoping to reform the city's image. Under Davis, a man named Martin Lavelle had been the director of public safety. He drove a Rolls-Royce and was on the mob's payroll.
He drove a Rolls-Royce.
But he was director of public safety.
So he's a civil servant.
Yes.
And he has one, even to this day, one of the most expensive cars, period.
Yes.
And anyone that sees a Rolls-Royce knows for a fact it's an absurdly expensive car.
Yes.
And nobody says, so here you have Ness coming into an area that I'm sure corruption was everywhere, but this was...
It was particularly bad in Cleveland. The mayor was corrupt. The police force was corrupt. People were taking bribes. And it had basically become, like I said, a safe haven for organized crime. You had all these mobsters moving in because, hey, they're not going to do a damn thing to us.
Yeah, when the corruption runs up through the ranks, all the way up through City Hall and everything, there's really no one that's going to come after you.
Well, here's an example of Lavelle. He had been on a, quote, liquor party boat during Prohibition, and a woman had died on the boat, and he didn't report the death.
Oh, wow.
And just went about his business until it finally came out that he was on the boat, he saw this, he did nothing.
Now, a liquor party boat sounds like a very bad idea, and it sounds like something that I would honestly never step foot on.
That sounds like a lie, but I have to say a liquor party boat isn't a good idea, especially if you're a person who gets motion sickness.
Yeah, and
because here's the thing, Dylan, you've never really been on a big boat.
No.
And you have no idea the kind of motion sickness that you might get on a big boat.
So us landlocked, us landlubbers, if you will, we a lot of people cannot stand that motion, right? It takes getting used to. Is that right? So when you're out on waters big water, the sea or oceans, there's going to be waves. There's going to be motion on the boat, right?
I'm sure there is.
Unless it's a very, very large vessel. And then you're still going to have some type of motion.
There's still motion.
Oh, wow.
All I will say, Dylan, is that I've never seen so many green people in the world until Marines would come aboard the amphibious assault ship I was stationed on.
Oh,
and
yeah?
that first day, there were many trash cans being utilized. Motion sickness.
So you have all these big, tough Marines, and they are tough.
They are.
And but then they were just on their knees, puking, dying, wishing, making it stop.
Yes.
Huh.
They don't have their sea legs yet. So I'm imagining a party boat, and you're out on like Lake Erie or something, which is huge, and there's waves, and it's basically the size of an ocean. Right?
It has its own climate.
And and so I'm sure that's happening. There's the rocking back and forth, and then you're drinking. I just can't imagine that's a good combination.
Gosh, and the liquor back then was so rough.
It's so gut rot. It's made in somebody's damn bathtub, and I know for a fool because you're a damn fool, Dylan. And I know for a fact you would be a damn fool drinking and probably fall off the side of the boat. And then they'd be fishing your bloated, dead ass out of the water. Like some time later when you finally float into the top.
I'm buoyant. I float very nicely, and I can swim like hell, like a fish.
When you're drunk.
Maybe not.
See?
But then I just go into float mode.
Now I know what to do. Next vacation, I'm scheduling us to go on a party boat.
A party liquor boat.
So that we can do a little science experiment.
And I will be found 4 days later floating, still sipping that bottle of gin.
Ew.
Oh, God, gin.
Yeah, you can keep the gin.
God, made from the juniper berries.
I hate gin.
Oh, my gosh.
It tastes like turpentine.
I don't know how you do it.
It smells like ass.
All right. So he's on a party boat. A woman dies under mysterious circumstances, I'm going to guess.
Yes.
And he thinks he can just walk away.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of bullshit this guy was doing, and he's supposed to be the director of public safety and doesn't even report the death.
That sounds like a very unsafe situation.
No, he just drives off in his rolls like, peace out. Sorry, you died, bitch. Bye. It was August of 1934 when a handyman named Joseph Hayduke walked along the beach in North Perry, Ohio. While strolling the shore of Lake Erie, Hayduke stumbled across a dead seagull. So here's the man just out having a walk, Dylan.
Hayduke?
Hayduke.
Okay.
Yeah. Believe it's maybe like a Norwegian.
Yeah.
The spelling, it looked Swedish to me, but maybe not. So yeah, just out having a stroll. Here's a dead seagull. But as he gets closer, Hayduke notices bones.
Oh, wow.
And that's when he finds a rib cage with flesh still visible along with a vertebrae. Just on the beach.
You never know what's going to wash up.
Hayduke contacted the Lake County Sheriff's Office to alert them to the bones. However, they told him it was likely an animal and that he should probably just bury the bones on the beach.
They didn't even have a look at it?
They didn't even want to waste the resources to come out and take a look.
Okay.
At what this man is saying looks like a human rib cage.
Yeah, I mean, there's fish, aquatic life are structured quite differently than humans. So I don't know of any that might have like full on rib cage and like, neck bones and stuff, bud.
Right.
Okay.
Well, 2 weeks later, on the morning of September 5th, 34-year-old Frank Lagasse was searching the beach for driftwood, a task he performed almost every day as it was a source of heat. So in the morning, he'd go look around, find some driftwood, take it back for the fire. Around 8 a.m., Lagasse was scanning the beach when something caught his eye. Now, at first, he thought it was his lucky day. It was a piece of a tree trunk that had washed up.
Oh, he's like, I'm about to have heat for days, y'all.
Yeah. And it was partly buried in the sand. But when he got closer, Lagasse was horrified. It wasn't a tree at all, but rather a decomposing woman's torso with legs amputated at the knees.
Oh my gosh.
Lagasse didn't want to upset his pregnant wife, so he ran to a neighbor's house asking if they would call the police. But Frank had to go to work, so he delicately explained what was happening to his wife and said, "You will probably have to meet with law enforcement and direct them just outside," right?
To go find that tree trunk I found.
Yeah. And the intensity of the situation was so much that his wife delivered their child early 2 days later.
So he had good reason to try not to upset his wife, it seems.
Yes, but no, I mean, this is just horrible. Like, who wants to go out and find a torso on their morning walk?
This is terrible. I mean, we always kind of kid around to a degree about the hunters, joggers, old man taking his, grandson fishing kind of thing. But I think you're going to have some PTSD. You're never going to be the same when you discover human remains like that, to varying degrees. The more horrible or bad the scene is, obviously your PTSD is going to be worse. But I don't think you can come away from that. Most normal, regular, everyday citizens, you're going to carry that with you for the rest of your life.
Authorities collected the victim, and the body was taken to the coroner in Cuyahoga County at the morgue. Arthur J. Peace, the coroner, concluded that the woman had been dead for around 6 months and that her body had been in the water around maybe 3 to 4 months. However, it was not waterlogged. which led Peace to believe she had been in some kind of container when she was dropped in the lake.
Oh, wow.
She was estimated to be in her mid-30s, weigh around 115 pounds, and stand about 5'6". She had an abdominal scar suggesting a hysterectomy, but that was fairly common, so they knew that wouldn't really be a way to identify her.
Now, is this a torso minus arms, head, and legs below the knee?
Yes.
So it's just a torso, and then you're from hip to knee.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yes.
Wow. That would be even worse to discover that.
Now, a chemical of some kind had been spread over the torso, creating a leathery red coating, which the coroner felt explained why the body was not more like seriously decomposed, and maybe why it wasn't waterlogged either, because whatever this was almost like a protective kind of coating.
Okay.
That kept the water from, doing what it do to the skin.
Right.
Now, it was speculated at the time to be maybe calcium hypochlorite or chloride of lime. I'm not familiar with either of those chemicals.
No, I'm not either. I was going to say the one sounds basically like bleach, but that hypochlorite I've dealt with before, it was sodium hypochlorite. I don't know if there's a difference.
Well, calcium, yeah, I would assume there's a difference still.
Right.
Now, after reading the newspaper report about the discovery of this body, Hayduke phoned the Lake County Sheriff's Office once again to report the bones he had found 2 weeks earlier. After a day of searching, law enforcement was able to find the shallow grave with Hayduke's help. Because remember, they told him, just bury those bones.
Just go ahead and bury it. It's just rib cage and a backbone. I mean, a lot of fish have that.
Yeah.
It's true.
Could just be a shark in the water. Who knows?
Maybe it's a man shark.
It's a lake shark. The bones were transported to Paintsville, where it was determined they were, in fact, human remains. It was also discovered that they were a match to the remains Lagasse had found. The upper torso was a perfect fit to the lower torso.
Oh, wow.
So in the days to follow, bizarre items turned up along the Lake Erie shoreline. During the week before Labor Day, a teenage girl ran out of the lake screaming, insisting that she'd seen a human hand floating in the water.
Yeah, it's funny when you have, now this is a lake, but it's a very big lake. The one, I think it's maybe the largest deposit of fresh water in the world, the Great Lakes, or one of them. Anytime you have this wave motion of the ocean or these huge lakes, it's funny how stuff always comes back to shore, no matter where you put it.
Yes, I'm totally listening to you.
It's true.
Yes, you can tell I care. Now, some fishermen got their lines caught up on something in the water, and when it finally broke loose, they freed the line, and whatever it was had caused some blonde hair to tangle around their fishing line.
Oh my gosh, that would be weird.
Yeah. A ferry boat operator reported seeing a human head bobbing up and down in the water. I mean, this is nightmare fuel.
So there's just pieces of bodies everywhere.
These are things that make me never want to go into the water again.
I freak out enough if a little fish bumps against my leg, which you should expect fish in the water, right?
I'm always paranoid about snakes.
But if I look around over and something's bobbing there and it turns out to be a leg with a foot on it, I don't know what I would do.
I'm just going to take a stick and try to move it away from me and be like, quit, man. You're ruining my float. I'm out here trying to get some sun.
You're not going to go in and report it?
Maybe later. A leg's not really going to bother me.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean,
I think it would.
Yeah, I don't want to touch it. Not like, but I have touched a dead leg. I don't know.
Now, is there a better piece of a body do you think would be the least traumatic to see floating?
No.
All of it's going to mess you up?
Probably. And floating bodies are, well, I'm just going to say it's not pretty.
I could imagine.
It's not pretty, so I don't know. I don't want to see it, but at the same time, The victim became known as the Lady of the Lake. That was like the nickname the press gave her. Now, after checking to make sure there were no grave robbers at work, police began a full search for body parts along the shore from downtown Cleveland all the way up to North Perry. The only other body part found during the search was the upper part of an arm near Euclid Beach State Park.
So you think they would just put out a call to local cemeteries in the area and have them search and make sure no one's been digging graves up? Would that be that simple to have a check like that?
Probably.
Okay.
Now, at the time, authorities didn't know if they were dealing with a homicide. One theory was the woman had been a suicide, and that she had been sliced by a propeller of a passing boat.
Okay. That's a decent theory, I think.
You think so?
Well, I mean, if someone did jump wherever and end up in the lake, because, all these different rivers running in there. And yeah, I mean, if you get caught, a large vessel would, it could chop a body up.
Okay. No,
I mean, I think that's okay.
Okay.
Theory.
See, that makes sense. In my brain, I was thinking the woman was like, oh, I'm going to jump in the water and hope that a boat runs me over.
That's how she committed
suicide. That's
suicide.
how I thought. That doesn't really make sense. But now that you've explained it in your Dylan way, I understand.
Wow.
Because, see, my brain was going in a totally different direction with this.
Yeah.
Because I thought that doesn't really
Suicide by propeller probably doesn't
really
make sense.
However, microscopic examination of the vertebrae showed cut marks from a sharp instrument, likely a knife.
Tool marks.
Due to the skill in dissection, the killer had a strong knowledge of anatomy. Some thought he could possibly be a butcher. Someone pointed out the killer would have known how to cut around a joint if he was a doctor, and that a saw had been used, and a doctor would never do that.
Would never cut around a joint with a saw?
Right. Well, that a doctor would have more skill and precision and would know that a saw wouldn't be the tool and would be able to kind of cut around. And so I believe it was the coroner who had pointed that out.
Right.
Like a doctor would have more skill. So I don't think it's a medical professional. It's probably
butcher or somebody familiar with a field dressing game or something
yeah,
like
or
that.
maybe like a med student who failed out of their first year.
Or a doctor who's like, screw it, I'm just going to use a saw.
All right. Well, the case baffled police. Monday, September 23rd of 1935, 1 year after the Lady of the Lake was discovered, around 5 p.m., two boys, 16-year-old James Wagner and 12-year-old Peter Costora, were tossing a softball back and forth along the upper edge of an area known as Jackass Hill.
Great name.
I knew you'd think that, and it actually sounds like it was named after you. So there's that.
Yeah. Can I say Lady of the Lake's a really great name? Unfortunately, it's to a murder victim, a victim of crime of some sort. But that's I think the press really had a little more panache back in the day, wouldn't you say? With their names of serial killers and
probably,
victims
yeah.
and things like that.
The hill was about, the way it's explained is that it's like a 60-foot slope on the side of Kingsbury Run, where two streets meet into a gully.
Okay.
So a hill, I guess, a 60-foot slope, that's a hill.
Well, that's I guess if you're on everything around it's flat, it would be considered a hill. Maybe it's more of a knoll.
When the ball landed in the gully, the older boy challenged the younger to a race to the bottom to see who could retrieve the ball first.
Last one has to buy breakfast.
Typically, sounds like something kids would do. When Wagner reached the bottom, his eyes met with something that was not a softball. He spotted a dead man with no head just hanging out in the brush.
Oh my gosh.
Running to find an adult, the boys finally found someone, got them to call authorities. The body of a nude white male wearing only a pair of black socks lay on its side in the brush. Not only had the victim been decapitated, but also emasculated, which is a nice way of saying that someone had cut off his dick.
Yeah.
His penis had been removed, Dylan.
That's the weirdest part of this. The dissecting and cutting up of the victims' bodies.
Yeah. Because why?
To what end?
Because I'm like, why?
Because it's like there's not even doesn't seem to be a real good attempt at hiding the remains. Because if you just toss a body in or near a big body of water like that, it's going to wash up. Everyone knows that the waves always push it back, no matter what. And in this instance, it doesn't sound like it was just tossed down there in this kind of gully situation.
Well, the body appeared to be drained of blood, which police theorized that the present location was merely a dumping ground. The victim had been murdered elsewhere and then placed here in Kingsbury Run. By the time more law enforcement showed up, a second body was discovered nearby as well. About 30 feet away, an older, stockier body of a man was found. The second man had red, leathery skin as if a chemical had been poured over it.
Oh, it's similar, right?
The head of the first corpse was found on the ground, buried about 20 feet away. So it was found in the ground, buried. And it seemed like just enough hair was protruding from the dirt to ensure that someone would find it.
Yeah, see, that's really weird. Now, if I was if I was one of these bodies, I would hope to be considered the hotter of the two. You know what I mean? That way they're trying to keep track. Which body? You talking about the hot guy or the guy who's not hot?
They'd be like the hot guy or the chunky guy.
Yeah, or the chunky hot guy? Or are you talking about that other guy?
The chunky, yeah.
Okay.
It would definitely be the chunky hot guy. You'd be the chunky hot guy, Dylan.
Oh, man, if you cut my head off, I would be like 50 pounds lighter.
I was going to say, all they would be like, we found a big-ass head.
We found a head.
And then they would be confused about which body, because they're like, there's no body that could
hold
maintain this giant-ass head.
And then they would actually think they found evidence of giants as well as 2 murder victims.
You do got a big-ass head, Dylan.
Oh, my God.
Now, by 5:30 p.m., a large contingent of law enforcement officers had descended upon the area. The head of the second victim was buried about 70 feet away. The severed genitals of both men were also nearby in a little pile.
This is horrific.
No, this is
I mean, it really
totally
is. I'm making cracks to keep from
not an okay situation.
getting in my feelings. These poor victims.
No, this is terrible.
Oh, my God.
A blue coat with a label B.R. Baker Company was found, along with a white shirt, white trousers, and a checkered cap discarded in the area. The clothing seemed to fit the second victim, though blood-soaked, leaving authorities to believe that he had been killed while wearing the clothing. And then, after he was murdered, the killer undressed him.
And see, it's like it's decapitation and all that. Your first thought is to prevent ID of the body or something like that, make it harder. But then you bury it all in the same place. So when one part's found, the rest is found. So that really doesn't, that just means they're doing it for the sheer joy of doing it. It's not even to some end, which is even scarier.
Well, and the bodies were both stripped and they were cleaned after death. Several pieces of rope, a railroad torch, and a 2-gallon bucket containing car engine oil mixed with blood were also nearby. Police theorized perhaps the killer tried to burn the second victim, who was covered in the chemical coating. Like perhaps this person had been doused with whatever this oily type of substance was, and they'd tried to... the killer had tried to set the victim on fire, but for whatever reason, it didn't quite ignite. It merely scorched the skin a little bit. Long black hair was also found in the bucket.
Oh my God.
There's something about a bucket of blood and hair that just really takes me somewhere special, Dylan. That is, I don't know why, but the image of that is horrible and really frightening.
The need for a bucket concerning anything with a human is just a horrifying thought for me.
Even if it's just to take a leak?
Yeah. But I just mean, anytime you're talking about victims and there's a bucket of anything, it just for some reason sends me into nightmare realm.
I'm just saying, if I saw a body, I might be like, okay. But if I saw a bucket with some blood and hair in it, that is what would send me to another place. Like I said, that's what would freak me out.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It just seems much more disconcerting. A bucket of blood and hair.
Just stop saying it.
That's actually a great name for a horror movie.
Bucket of blood and hair?
Yeah.
Or just the bucket? I think that is ominous in itself.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so word quickly spread through the neighborhood, of course. Kids were running around shouting, "I saw the head! Mommy, I saw the head!"
Get inside and put that arm down. Timmy, I've told you once, let the police do their work.
Fucking kids, man. Oh, okay. Sadly, the boys who found the bodies would go on to meet tragedy. Peter Castora was struck by a drunk driver a few years later and died about 6 hours after he was hit by this drunk driver.
Oh my
He was just
gosh.
walking down the street. And then James Wagner was killed during World War II. The sister of one of the boys was saying, this was a really traumatic event for both of the young boys. And it just devastated them.
I'm sure.
And that it was something they carried with them, for a while. I mean, this is not okay.
I have no doubt about that.
The coroner was able to identify the first body as 29-year-old Edward W. Andrassy, who lived near the West Side. A petty criminal, Andrassy was known to law enforcement. He was a regular at some of the sleazy establishments of Rowdy Row, a rough, crime-infested strip of bars and tenements in the Roaring Third. He was known to gamble and often pass out in the graveyard.
That will earn you a certain kind of reputation.
He had trouble with police for drinking, fighting, and had spent time in a workhouse for carrying a concealed weapon, which the workhouse is basically like jail, but they make you do stuff.
Yeah, but you can end up in a workhouse just from being poor as well.
Oh, you can.
We actually looked that up, and we were watching some period piece movie, and they were going to come take this woman's kids who were, just now right at like 10, 11, 12, and they ended up were getting sent to a workhouse. And I was like, what exactly is that? And it really has been equated to like a debtor's jail of sorts. If you can't afford to take care of yourself or your kids, you could end up in a workhouse where you're forced to do very strenuous manual labor things like
Alongside criminals.
clear brush, break up rocks, literally like something you'd see in a old 1920s movie, the chain gang and stuff. And yeah, right alongside criminals. And your only crime was being poor. It's really scary.
During the late 1920s and early 1930s, Andrassy was an orderly in the city's psychiatric ward. He was known to be a handsome ladies' man. However, there were also rumors of homosexuality and, quote, sexual perversion.
Whoa.
Andrassy's friends and family shared stories of jealous husbands who'd threatened to kill him. Andrassy had been estimated dead for 2 to 3 days before discovery. He had been murdered, they believed, late Friday night or early Saturday morning. His last meal had been vegetables. They found he had rope burns on his wrists, which led the coroner to believe he might have been alive when the decapitation occurred. One of the officers declared, "It's a hell of a job to remove a human head."
It is. I bet it's not as easy as people think. Unless maybe people don't think that's easy, but I think it's a hell of a lot harder to cut a body up, period.
The coroner determined the cause of death was decapitation and shock, and that it was most definitely homicide.
And when your head is removed from your body, that definitely kills you.
Yeah. Imagine being alive for this. This guy's tied up, and someone does this while he is alive.
That's horrible. I hope at the very least that wasn't the case. I hope he wasn't alive when this was being done to him.
The second victim was far more difficult to identify because they couldn't get good fingerprints. The victim had been dead for a week or maybe 10 days, and the body was coated with oil and set on fire, but didn't burn, as I mentioned. It only kind of scorched the skin, but they were unable to get any kind of fingerprints. And the face was so badly decomposed and kind of scorched and scalded, they couldn't really even make like a mask.
Right.
The newspapers quickly published stories about the bodies, with one reporting, quote, "the most bizarre double murders here in recent years." Theories were printed, including that maybe the two men had known each other and their killer, that these were crimes of passion involving a woman, and of course details that each man had been decapitated and of course emasculated.
So the papers are full of essentially pure speculation.
Absolutely.
Isn't that crazy?
Oh man, there's some sensationalism happening with these news stories for sure.
It's like we went through a period with journalism from very early on, and then they realized the power of it, and Hearst during all the yellow journalism and all that. And then it's like it cleaned up and kind of got respectable respectable
And
for some
we're
years.
right back to it just being a big old pile of shit.
And
yes,
now
you can't believe anything that's printed.
We've come around all the way around full circle.
Now it's just propaganda.
I don't even think investigative journalism even exists anymore.
Well, it doesn't. They don't want to pay anybody.
Well, they don't want to pay anybody, and they also will not allow anyone to go and investigate certain things because of their corporate overlords who own all the papers and news and everything.
No, now 90% of what you're getting isn't even like objective news story. It's opinion.
It's pure opinion.
Yeah.
What the freaking hell?
Look, you're talking to a journalism major.
I know.
You telling me, okay? They don't want to pay you. They don't want investigative journalists. And the only way they're going to hire you for their newspaper is if you've got like a graduate degree. But then they're like, hey, we're glad you have a master's. We're offering you $12 an hour.
Right.
Enjoy yourself.
And we don't want you to do anything that actually digs into the nuts and bolts of what's really affecting people's daily life. We want you to do this piece about a little kitty being born.
Print news is dead. Most newspapers have such a small staff, and then they rely on either, big organizations like the Associated Press or whatever
comes across the line on
UPI,
the AP
to supply their filler. And then you've got a lot of these like blogger, freelance writers who get paid jack shit. I mean, the money's terrible. People are like, why don't you freelance write? And I'm like, because I can earn more money just not doing anything.
Wow.
You make about the same money sitting on your ass. I'm not going to write you a 1,000-word article for $30. Sorry.
Right.
But that's a lot of what you get. So you're getting shit. You get what you pay for. Police launched a major investigation over the next 2 days. Leads were followed, interviews conducted, and the area was scoured for clues. Now, as far as the second victim, there was little they could do to identify him besides check some missing persons reports.
And that's the one with the bad fingertips.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
the
all they knew
scorched
about
face.
him is he was like kind of heavy set. He was a little stockier, a little shorter than the other guy. But I mean, they didn't really have any information to go on.
Just a general physical description of the person.
Yes. Andrassy was last seen by his family on Thursday. His parents said he had driven up to their house in a large, dark-colored car. His mother described it as the kind a gangster would drive.
Oh, okay.
He was looking for his brother, John, and then no one saw him again until Monday night at the morgue. According to his family, a man had come to their home 2 weeks before the murder, threatening to kill Edward if he did not stay away from the man's wife. Andrassy denied any knowledge of the affair, stating the man must be crazy. Weeks before, Edward had gotten into a fight with an Italian man, which led to a stabbing, and he told his family he feared a gang was after him for the incident.
Now, so he was known as a ladies' man, right?
Known as a ladies' man.
And there's multiple stories of him having issues with their spouses, if you will.
Yes.
So I kind of wonder if the police are thinking, hey, maybe he's not connected to these other murders. Maybe it's just a one-off. But at the same time, his body's been desecrated in a similar fashion
And he's found
as the other victims.
with another guy just a few feet away.
Okay.
So
Maybe not.
yeah, it's hard to say, Dylan, but I'm going to go with no. So the week before he died, his family said that Andrassy seemed depressed and didn't want to leave the house, fearing for his life. Again, he felt that this Italian gang, which in some other reports was described as possibly like the mafia, was after him because he had stabbed an Italian man in a bar fight.
Okay.
Diving into Andrassy's personal life, police found his exploits with women were impressive, Dylan. He was known to go to nightclubs, always accompanied by a different woman. Others detailed homosexual liaisons with an African-American man who had been his friend since childhood. This guy, Feltz, who was the childhood friend, offered up what might be a possible identity for the second man.
Oh, really?
So they go to speak with this childhood friend who allegedly was having a romantic affair. That was never really confirmed. But the man was like, I think I know who this other victim was. He said the man's name was Eddie and that he was a chauffeur who drove a big, dark-colored car.
Oh, wow.
The same described by Edward's mother. And that the car belonged to a woman who lived like out of town,
See,
like in a neighboring area.
this could be a huge piece of information for the investigators.
Well, police could not make a connection. There was no missing persons report for an Eddie, a chauffeur, a driver. The car never turned up.
Okay.
So it didn't go anywhere. Police wondered how there were no drag marks at the crime scene. The killer had somehow managed to get the bodies to the foot of Jackass Hill, which was impossible to do by car. Had he carried the victims down the slope? So that would mean it would have to be someone with a lot of physical strength to
To be
carry
able to
these two.
pick them up and throw them over his shoulder and not be dragging them on the ground.
Right, to carry these two bodies because there's nowhere to park near where they're found, and they would have to be, carried, I think it was like 100 feet or something to get to the spot from where a car could park. And why had no one seen anything? I mean, this is an area that's quite visible. There's a lot of people around, and yet no one had seen anyone carrying a body and just tossing it.
Well, and I was thinking in my head, well, he obviously the killer likely carried them one at a time.
Well, I'm sure.
But I didn't realize this was a fairly visible area. It's not, as desolate as the gully. But I'm trying to get my head wrapped around. So this is where two roads kind of merge together. And then this area where they're discovered is like 60 feet down the hill.
Well, it sounds like there's this slope.
Right.
And then you have this area where there's a gully, and that's kind of where the roads connect.
Okay.
And that you almost have like maybe a gully on the side of where these roads connect. And then this sort of embankment or this hill area. But it seems the way it was described is that it was visible, like it was a visible spot.
Right. Not only from above, but then you got two roads coming through the area.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not some desolate hole somewhere.
No, I mean, it is kind of a rundown area, and you've got like train tracks and abandoned buildings and that kind of thing, but you also have these rows of like bars, and you have these little shanties everywhere.
And more than likely, people on foot, people come through the area.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had these boys over here playing baseball.
Yeah.
So it's not an uncommon area to be, and yet no one has seen a thing.
Yeah, and you'd have to be awfully comfortable to dump two bodies there.
Edward Andrassy would remain one of the two victims to be positively identified in the murders to come. Cleveland once hosted the largest Hungarian population in the world, only second to Budapest. Andrassy, I called him Andrassy. Andrassy, I don't know how you say his name. Andrassy's parents migrated to the United States in 1902. In the old country, his family, the Andrassys, were of nobility. Yet Edward's father was just a working class guy.
That would be my luck.
But because of that, when they moved to Cleveland, what I was reading about some of the Hungarian immigrants is that there were like the wealthy to-do that lived on like one side of town, and then you kind of had like the poorer immigrants living on the other side of town. And despite the fact that they were working class, because of their family name, they lived kind of in the nice Hungarian neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah. When Andrassy worked at the psychiatric hospital, he had been hired and fired 11 times in 8 years.
That seems like a lot.
Police just couldn't shake the idea that Andrassy's murder was some kind of payback, especially due to the rope burns on the wrist, because their thought was, why would someone want to decapitate a person who is alive unless this is a revenge killing, unless you hate this person and you want to inflict some kind of pain?
That's a fair theory, but we also don't know for sure that the rope burns came from, him actually being decapitated alive. He could have been struggling from the moment he was tied up. Some people are like, hey, freaking out, let me get the hell out of this, and trying their best to get loose. So without having, specific evidence that he truly was alive when he was decapitated, I don't know how much weight I would give the rope burns. What do you think about that?
Well, no, I think that it seemed pretty evident that this was a person who was having their head cut off and they're tied up.
So
I don't think it was just, hey, I'm struggling here. I think this was like so severe that
you're still pulling,
fighting for your life.
Even when it'd be super painful,
yes.
You're still pulling.
Plus, the coroner would be able to kind of tell these things, Dylan. Like, no, this person was alive when their head was cut off versus,
Okay.
yeah. And they can tell like when the heart stops and if a wound is post-mortem.
Right.
and those
Yeah, I
kinds of
know that.
things.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So in 1928, Edward had married a nurse at the hospital. She became pregnant, but by then the marriage had soured. She returned to her parents' home in Vickery, Ohio, where their daughter was born. And after the daughter was born, she filed for divorce. Edward's daughter saw the little girl once when she was about 4 years old. He came to the grandparents' house. The daughter said he asked to speak to her mother and pointed to her and said, "Is that the kid?"
Wow. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah. And her grandfather was just like, "Yes, now get on somewhere,"
Ah.
basically. So, sounds like he was a really good guy.
That was a sweet moment of being reunited with your father.
January 26th of 1936 was a brutally cold day in Cleveland. A woman found 2 half-bushel baskets in the snow, and when she looked inside, she saw they were little newspaper-wrapped packages. She thought it was butchered hams and went to a nearby meat market to say that someone had left these baskets of meat outside.
Somebody done lost their baskets of hams.
Thinking maybe the butcher shop had been burglarized, the owner rushed up the alley behind the Hart building to find the baskets. Of course, the man was shocked when he realized it was not stolen hams, Dylan. It was frozen human remains.
Oh, my God. It's even shocking the butcher.
Behind Hart Manufacturing, law enforcement found the 2 baskets neatly packed with the lower half of a female torso, 2 thighs, a right arm, and a hand.
These are some big-ass baskets.
I have pictures of the baskets.
Okay.
I can post those for our listeners.
I think we should because I feel like they're large baskets.
It's pretty gruesome. Cinder and coal dust were embedded in the skin. The lower piece of torso bore indentations of lump coal.
Okay.
Everything had been wrapped neatly in newspaper. The baskets were covered with 2 burlap sacks. Later in the day, a 3rd burlap bag stained with blood, which also contained some chicken feathers, matted in the blood.
And it sounds like at some point the remains were left to rest on top of a pile of coal, actual pile of coal.
It's very strange.
Which wouldn't be as uncommon as it is nowadays because a lot of people use that for heat.
Well, yes, but who's just going to be like, "Oh, here, I'm butchering a body. Let me place it on top of this coal."
Well, yeah, you shouldn't. I mean, most people wouldn't ever be butchering a body, but it's still rather strange.
So this 3rd bag turns up on East 18th Street. Police were able to get fingerprints from the victim. She was identified later as Florence Palillo, a well-known person to law enforcement. She was a part-time sex worker. Palillo was known as a hard-drinking, hard-living woman in her early 40s, also described as being chunky with bad teeth.
Oh, okay. There's no need to attack her personal appearance, but...
Well, these newspapers.
These newspapers.
Plus, at the time, they said she weighed 160 pounds, and they were describing her as being, obese. So little do they know of obesity in America. Because I'm like, I wish I weighed 160 pounds. She had previous arrests for soliciting and prostitution in Cleveland and Washington, D.C. The Cleveland News linked the woman's murder to the Lady in the Lake and was actually the first to do so. It seems like the police had forgotten that they had found a woman in a similar state a year before.
How in the world did they forget when one of the other victims had a similar kind of oily chemical residue all over their body?
So the Cleveland News was the first to kind of link, hey, we had the Lady of the Lake. Her body washed up 15 months before. Now we have another lady who's, it's a torso. It's very similar.
Yeah. And the cops are reading the paper hey, wait a minute.
Palillo had a bunch of aliases, and she had just as many addresses to match the aliases. So it seemed like she would rent a place using a fake name and then skip out after owing some months' worth of rent.
Okay.
She had rented a room in a boarding house in May of 1935 and was still living there. Her landlady recalled seeing Polillo leave the house on Friday the 24th wearing a black coat with a fur collar. According to the coroner's report, they thought that she might have been murdered later that night. So she'd been dead for so many days. She was known to drink alone in her room sometimes, and the landlord said she would become quarrelsome when she was drinking. Otherwise, Polillo was quiet and kept to herself. If she was working as a prostitute at the time, her landlord did not know anything about it. Polillo had a doll collection in her room and was known to allow the landlord's daughters to play with them, and would often let the little girls come in her room and play with these dolls. It was like a porcelain doll collection.
Okay, so she sounds like a fairly normal woman. She maybe had some issues with the sauce, I think a lot of us can maybe be quarrelsome when we drink. But it sounds like now she was doing sex work, she kept it super low key.
Right. She wasn't doing it at the boarding house.
She wasn't bringing them back where she lives. She maybe wasn't doing it full time, or who knows if she was doing it at all. Right.
When police dug into her friends, they learned she ran with some pretty unsavory characters, mostly criminals, bootleggers, thieves. Yet they offered little information about her death.
They're probably not real keen to talk to cops at all.
Well, of course. On February 7th, police responded to a call at 1419 Orange Avenue around 5:45 a.m. In the rear of a vacant house, the upper half of a female torso minus the arms and legs were found. The skin was dotted with dirt, coal, and chicken feathers.
Oh my gosh, dude, this is some great trace evidence on these bodies.
About 6 feet away near a fence, they found the lower legs and the left arm in a heap.
I think there's a coal-burning chicken who's the killer. Just solved it.
Makes sense.
6 foot tall, coal-burning chicken.
I never trusted a fucking chicken.
I don't trust them
Clucking
either.
around.
I don't. Look at their dead eyes.
Pecking at shit.
They just peck at anything, even another dead chicken. You can't trust them.
You can't.
They're left over from the dinosaurs.
Yeah, they are. So this ends up being some more of Polillo's remains that they find.
Oh my gosh.
However, Polillo's head would never be recovered. The body had been discovered by a trucking employee who worked on Orange Avenue. Harry Bennett, who owned the trucking company, recognized Polillo from her mugshot and told police that he had seen the woman walking drunk on Woodland Avenue a couple weeks before her death.
Now,
he'd recognized her. He was like, oh yeah, I've seen her in this area quite a few times. She always seems to be drunk, kind of walking up and down the street here.
She seems quarrelsome from afar. So this is the victim who was found in the baskets, right?
Yes.
And that were frozen,
Yes.
right? Or evidence of being froze. Okay. I think that could be very important.
Now, the man had spotted her on Woodland Avenue a couple weeks before her death, but he had also remembered seeing her arguing with an inebriated black man who was shabbily dressed and appeared to be in his 50s. And this would have been just before she was murdered. Not the night of, but just in the days before.
Right.
Yeah. Now, according to the pathologist, she had been decapitated at the level of 5th cervical vertebrae with clean edges indicating a knife rather than a saw had been used. The body was virtually bloodless.
See, it's almost like they're being hung up and drained of blood, bud. Like you would do a deer out
Well,
in the
you'd have to
woods.
think of a person whoever this killer is, they have to have space to be able to work.
Space and time. And a level of comfort, right? Because not many people come by and you're dressing a body. Everybody's not going to be okay with that, okay? Unless you have some partner that's helping you kill people. So, yes, it really sounds like, at the very least, knowledge of being a butcher or an avid hunter who is very hands-on with the kill, Because I noticed that some hunters nowadays are bougie, right? They don't really even, they pay all this money for a hunting lease or a club to be part of. They have all this gear. They do all this stuff to bait the deers in and such. But then they shoot it, and then they just grab it, and then they drop it off at a processor and let them, fix it and prepare the meat. And now, but the old school cats, they don't do any of that. They'll dress it themselves. Even if they don't bring it home and hang it up, they'll do it right there on the spot in the woods. Field dress it, take the best parts they want. But yeah, I think this person has to they have to be super comfortable with dead things. And a butcher or a very skilled hunter is the main thing that comes to mind. Honestly, what do you think?
Makes sense. Yeah.
And then you get a freezer. I mean, frozen parts. And
it's really cold outside. I mean, you have to remember this is Cleveland in January.
Well, that's
when she's
true.
Found.
Well, that's true.
It's blistering cold.
That's true.
And you have to think this is, almost 100 years ago, right? So you are definitely going to have colder temperatures.
That's true. That could have been an environmental thing. That could have not actually been put in a freezer.
It sounds like it wasn't a freezer, Dylan. It just sounds like
they were half frozen.
It was very cold outside, and being left out for some hours in the cold.
Okay.
That it probably froze the remains.
That's a valid point, but it's just the way these remains are being handled.
Plus, I'm just not even sure. Back in 1935, they had deep freezers, Dylan.
Or were they still using chunks of ice? I'll have to look that up. But no, they probably didn't have the $12,000 Sub-Zero freezer.
This is the Depression. They did not.
That Nancy Pelosi wanted to tell us about in front of. Oh, we enjoy ice cream during the pandemic. In front of your $24,000 worth of freezers. You son of a bitch. Those are valid points, but just it's very odd the way these remains are being handled and the way they're being found kind of scattered out. It's very strange to me.
7 months later, a woman would tell detectives that while she was in the workhouse, another inmate had identified the killer of Florence Polillo as a former butcher who worked at a meat market on St. Clair. The man was, quote, a sodomist who carried a large butcher knife. So police look into this lead, but they are unable to implicate the man in the murder.
Now, a sodomist would be someone who partakes in anal sex. Is that right?
Well, by definition, I think legally,
it doesn't have to be that. It could be oral. It
can be other things, yes.
So is it just like a deviant behavior of any type kind of thing?
It is considered sexual intercourse involving anal or oral copulation.
Okay.
Similar to anal intercourse, anal sex, buggery, pedication, intercourse per annum.
Buggery?
According to the Oxford Language Dictionary.
Okay.
Buggery, Dylan.
A known sodomist that carries a big knife.
Yes. And from what I gather, police were able to track the man down, but were unable to implicate the man in the murder. So after months of hard, frustrating investigations, police were no closer to solving these murders. Every movement of Polillo's life had been accounted for except when she left the rooming house on January 24th at 8:30 p.m. and disappeared into the night. Within hours, she'd met her fate at the hands of a killer. No one noticed a thing when her body was left in these baskets.
That's the crazy part. But that just tells you what type of area this is. And I think a lot of times in cities, I think you would consider this a city back in the day, people just mind their own damn business. And they just kind of walk around looking, just trying to stay out of the way. They don't go poking things. They don't go asking questions. They don't make contact with every person they see. And they just kind of just trying to get through the day without anything crazy happening around them.
Without finding a body.
Without finding a body.
The less that you engage, the less likely you are to find a head or a leg or,
This would work for you.
An arm.
You would be able to just ignore things around you. But
Man,
I just feel like I'd be the one.
I think I could win an award for the most consecutive days in a row that I don't leave my house.
Well, that's true. I just feel like I'd be the first one that has to know what's in those baskets.
Well, you're very nosy, yes.
Yeah, and I would poke it with a stick or something like that. Damn it. I would find it.
I know you would.
There's no doubt about it.
As a summer of again, reasons why you're on the liability list.
Because I poke things with a stick?
Yes, that is a liability.
I would call it situational awareness.
That's a liability, Dylan.
Don't poke things with a stick.
You could be poking a bomb. You could be poking a snake, which I'm not okay with.
Could be a damn bear in that basket.
Yes.
Okay.
It could be anything. And you over there just poking it.
Oh, look, a crocodile. Let's poke it with a stick.
You're not Crispin Glover, and this is not the river's edge. Do not poke it, Dylan. Now, as the summer of 1936 approached, city leaders were hopeful that an economic future for Cleveland might be looking up a little bit. The Republican National Convention would be held in the city, which could help boost the economy. Then, on June 27th, the Great Lakes Exposition opened for a 100-day run. The last thing anyone wanted was negative publicity about Cleveland.
Oh, or random body parts being discovered everywhere.
Well, that's what they don't want.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, it never fails. It never fails. That there's always some kind of politics or, some financial worry tied up in cases like this. And to a degree, I get it. Especially you have this area that's boomed, and now it's kind of wavered, and now it's trying to come back again. And I guess this is the last thing any community wants, really.
Well, it's almost the equivalent of how, like, our local news, TV news station will report that crime is down in Asheville, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, and by the weekend, by the way, this weekend 3 people were murdered."
Yeah, right.
It's still safe. Well,
It's still safe, except for those people that were murdered.
Except for those 3 shootings we had that killed people. Yeah,
That's a lot of shootings
yeah.
for this area.
Well, yeah.
We just recently had our 7th and 8th homicide, and I know to a lot of people in a lot of areas, they're like, "Huh, dude, that's like a Wednesday or something."
But when that used to be like maybe you would have 1 homicide every like 4 years.
Yeah, dude,
That's
that
a
would
big deal.
That would have been a decade and a half for this area 10 years ago, easy. I mean, it was really an odd thing to find someone who has died and not be of natural causes or an accident. Yeah, to actually be homicide, it's very strange. And I forecast an even worse year for this area next year.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
I'm kind of glad we're leaving. Not kind of. I am glad. On the morning of Friday, June 5th, 2 young African-American boys, 11-year-old Louis Cheeley and 13-year-old Gomez Ivy, were walking through Kingsbury Run on a path along the New York Central Railroad tracks. The boys were playing hooky from school, just trying to go fishing, Dylan.
And walking the tracks.
The boys spotted a pair of pants rolled up, and they thought maybe there was some money in the pockets. The boys poke the bundle. See, Dylan, this is why you don't poke things, okay?
I would have been in school.
No, you wouldn't.
I'd have been too afraid to play hooky.
That's a damn lie.
That's not a damn lie. That's a damn truth.
Why your mama would have bust your ass?
My mom would have tore my little ass up.
I feel like she didn't do it enough. Because you really out of control as an adult. And I feel like you didn't get your ass beat enough as a kid.
She had me lined up pretty good. I was straightened out pretty
What's
good.
happened to you?
Well, from a rather young age.
So I'm not firm enough? Is that what you're saying?
No, that doesn't mean
as your mommy, I'm not firm enough?
You don't need to start spanking me more. Unless you wanna. No, and from a rather early age, 15 or so, I didn't really have anyone to answer to. And I think maybe I carried that bad habit over into my adulthood to a certain degree. Now, I wouldn't want the listeners to think I'm just totally out of control.
Now answer this, bitch. You see what I'm saying? See this? You answer this. Quit poking things. Because the boys poke the bundle with a fishing pole, Dylan, which causes it to slowly unroll. And beneath a pants leg, they find a grimy head. That's how it was described. A grimy head.
So they went from a day of hooky and leisurely fishing and having some fun to now they got to go get the investigators. They got to call the cops.
And you know why? Because they was poking
Because they poked the bundle.
Because they poked the bundle.
I think it's a case in point on not poking things.
Stop poking things, Dylan. The boys were so frightened, they ran away screaming. When Ivy's mother returned home at 5 p.m. from work, the boys asked what they should do. And she told them, "You need to see a police officer." They were so scared, they ran home and shut the door and waited for mom to get home.
Well, they were already at somewhere they shouldn't be, doing something they shouldn't be doing, playing hooky. And so that doesn't surprise me that they were shocked and ran home.
A railroad detective had patrolled the area about 18 hours earlier, and the head wasn't there. It had probably been placed there hours before the boys found it. About 20 feet from the head, a pair of size 7.5 shoes were discovered. Stuffed inside the trouser legs were a polo shirt and a button-up shirt. There was no body, however. Officers combed the area, searching through empty boxcars and down in the gullies and depressions. The hobo shanties nearby were checked, but there was nothing, not even a trace of blood, to be found.
These boys are lucky. They could have crossed paths with this killer placing these materials there, and they could have very well gotten in, became a victim themselves.
The head was cleaned up by morgue workers and put on display in hopes someone might be able to identify the person, who was male. An estimated 2,000 people filed through the morgue to catch a glimpse, but no one recognized the young man.
And see, there's a leftover of that Victorian era kind of gruesome fascination with dead things.
People have, for years, they've all been fascinated by the morbid and the macabre.
Well, it's true. People act like, some people act like it's a new phenomenon. But honestly, we do it to a less degree nowadays.
Yeah, I'm going to say people is like way less.
People would take souvenirs off bodies and stuff.
Yeah, people don't do, people don't go to the morgue and look at heads now. I guess if they had them on display, I probably would go look at the head.
Well, yeah, there's not a body being displayed for, weeks on end in the town square.
Yeah, and some people were just going by, not even to see if they could identify the body, but they just wanted to go see the head.
Most of the people knew they probably couldn't identify the body. That's the reason they're there, for morbid fascination.
A break came in the case on June 6th when New York Central crane operators found a naked, headless corpse lying on its side, covered in twigs, just east of the East 55th Street Bridge, behind the New York Central and Nickel Plate Railroad track, which was about 1,000 feet from the spot where the boys found the head the day before.
I'm going to bet that body goes with that head.
It was about 800 feet away from where Andrassy and the other victim had been found in the previous September. The body had 6 different tattoos, including a butterfly, a comic character known as Jiggs. So I'm assuming that's like a little comic book, like maybe a cartoon strip character.
Oh, okay. Like that would be in the newspaper or something.
Yeah, in the funny papers.
Oh, okay.
That's what my great-grandpa called them.
The funny pages.
The funnies. Yeah. Crossed flags with WCG initials tattooed under the flags. And then there was a tattoo of a cupid and an anchor, and also a tattoo featuring the names Paul and Helen. Investigators speculated the man had been a sailor, or possibly involved in organized crime, as those were the only folks back then who tended to have tattoos.
That's funny, isn't it?
It
Criminals and sailors.
Yeah, well, I have to say, just this is a side note. So when I was at my dad's for Christmas yesterday, my stepmother's family was there, and her grandsons. She has like 4 grandsons, and they're all, young boys. And they're these twins. And the twins were making fun of something, and then they said, like those old tattooed smoker ladies.
Nice.
And then everybody turns and kind of looks at me like awkwardly or something.
Heather's like, I don't smoke. But I'm an old tattoo lady.
And I was like, well, yeah, I'm definitely one of those or whatever. But it was funny because then they all looked at me like,
Can't believe they said that.
Yeah, I'm so offended.
In front of a tattooed person. Hell, everybody's got tattoos
I know.
nowadays.
Oh, God. A tattooed lady who smokes. It's the worst.
It's honestly lost its luster to a degree.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Oh, I'm just like, what's the big deal? But that's so funny. Anywho, this guy was about 5'11" and weighed 165 pounds or so. Death was attributed to the decapitation and shock that followed.
That will do it.
The discovery of the body made the front pages where it vied for attention with the Republican National Convention. One investigator told the press his theory that the victim was a transient who had likely fallen asleep on the train and was then attacked by the killer. The fingerprints turned out to be a dead end too, as the tattooed man had no criminal record. A shirt label was traced to a California manufacturer. But other than that, they didn't really have any leads.
And that's pretty wild. So maybe the guy is from outside the area, because I got to say, those tattoos were rather specific. And considering back then, a very small percentage of the population had any tattoos at all, let alone that combination. It seems like they would have got a hit with that.
Well, this is interesting, Dylan, because police, they actually photographed the tattoos, and the tattoos were presented to artists all over the country.
Oh, tattoo artists.
Like known tattoo artists.
Okay.
And no one recognized the work.
Oh, wow. He could be from another country.
Well, there was some speculation that he could have been a foreign sailor.
Okay.
Possibly.
Or maybe a merchant marine or something like
Authorities decided to make a plaster death mask and put it on display at the Great Lakes Expo. Thousands of visitors viewed the mask, but again, no one recognized the victim.
that. Very common practice back then.
Yes.
The death mask.
Yes. A photographer who had taken a picture of Andrassy named John Mosner. So when they started looking into Andrassy, they found a photo of him that was taken in this kind of lavish room. It was like decorated with all this Baroque and like antique type of, decor. And there were these pictures of like sort of nude and Japanese women on the walls and like a Japanese lantern in the picture. So of course they're interested in like who took this picture of this victim, right?
Yeah.
Well, they were able to trace it to this guy named John Mosner, who like lived in the area, and he said that Andrassy had like just shown up and wanted his portrait taken. So
he just happened to have his dope ass room to do it in.
yeah, well, I guess he was really into decor, and his sisters at one point had thought he might grow up to be an interior decorator.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
But
So anyway, among the pictures in this guy John Mosner's possessions, because they searched, they were just looking for any lead. So they searched through his stuff and they actually found a photograph of a young naval officer. The naval officer bore a striking resemblance to the still unidentified fourth victim known as the Tattooed Man. Yet Mosner claimed that the picture was over 20 years old. And because it was circumstantial evidence and it was just kind of a clue that went nowhere. They just, they were like, well, we can't prove 100% that this is the tattooed guy, even though it looks a hell of a lot like him.
And he's saying it's 20 years ago, so there's no way it's that guy.
Yes.
Okay.
On the morning but it's just a strange coincidence, right?
It's a very strange coincidence.
On the morning of July 22nd, 1936, a 17-year-old girl named Marie Barkley decided to take a hike through a wooded area near her home to an outside area of Cleveland that was called Brooklyn, where there were a few homes and small farms. It was a kind of a desolate area. In a gully near West 98th Street and the rayon plant nearby, Barkley made a grisly discovery. The naked, headless body of a white male in an advanced state of decomposition was just lying out in the woods. When law enforcement arrived, they did find the head about 10 to 15 feet away, lying on top of the victim's clothing stained with blood. A single-breasted dark gray suit, a dark brown leather belt, well-worn size 8 black Oxfords, and a light blue polo shirt were all sort of neatly folded with just this head hanging out.
So very strange.
The man had been killed where his body lay, so there was definitely blood there, and it didn't seem like he'd been dropped here.
It's almost like it's being posed for someone to find it in this state.
Yeah, it almost seems like that's part of the killer's, kicks is knowing someone's going to find the body.
Yeah, with these clothes folded up with a head sitting on top of it.
The victim appeared to be dead for about 2 months. It was an isolated crime scene with few clues and no leads at all. Because the body had been in a spot surrounded by vagrant camps and railroads, the victim was likely a hobo himself, police speculated. Given the condition of the remains, no facial cast could be created, and fingerprints could not be used to identify the man. Police tried to fingerprint him anyway, but it didn't work out. The victim was a slight man, about 5'5", who weighed around 145 pounds. He had long, brownish hair. The pathologist estimated the victim was around 40 years old. The victim's back and legs were hardened and brownish in color, the skin. The chest had been destroyed by decomposition, rats, and insects. The abdominal cavity filled with worms and bugs.
Oh my gosh.
The head was separated from the body at the third or fourth cervical vertebrae. Missing persons reports from the last 6 months were studied, but no identification was made. Some detectives began to wonder if there was a, quote, group of thrill killers responsible for the murders, rather than a lone killer.
Well, I guess you might wonder how the killers moving around so efficiently by themselves and accomplishing all these things as far as where the bodies are being found. And you have
some obvious similarities here, but there doesn't seem to be a totally strict MO.
which could be because multiple people are involved.
Well, because you have female victims, you have male victims. Some have been, emasculated, some have not.
Some have not been killed where they were dumped, some have been.
So you find a head with some bodies, and some bodies you merely find a torso. Or you find the head but no body.
Gosh, it's really weird.
Or you find a head and then a couple days later you find the body in a completely different place.
I gotta say, it seems like investigators are trying, for the most part, their best to get some kind of a lead on these victims, but they just don't have a lot to work with, given the period this has happened, and forensic technologies available to them. They're just really not getting a lot to go on.
No, and there's only so much they can do with that. And you have to think about, like, forensics definitely were not what they are today. You didn't have DNA to work with. You're very limited.
If you have to look something up, just something simple, it could take all day.
You
or it
didn't
could take
have
a week
you
to
weren't
figure it out.
They weren't as globally connected, so
Right.
they were not able to get word out to even neighboring police departments.
No, a lot of times somebody had to go in person on an errand or to go to another region or department and try to facilitate some type of, information.
It was the first time the killer had ventured to the west side. However, victim number 5 had likely been killed before the tattooed man who was discovered earlier. This man had not been emasculated. The killer had also left his clothes nearby, which was different from the second and third victim. Though the majority of investigators felt it was the work of a single killer, they were still investigating the case as if it were individual murders. And so they weren't really changing their techniques as far as investigation goes.
And that's really, I think, hurts in a situation like this. Even if they're considering the possibility of them being connected. Well, why in the world wouldn't you be looking at it all together? And of course, this is...
Well, again, this is before we even had a term for serial killer.
Or task force or, all these other techniques they've developed since then to help with a big case like this.
This is like 30 years before the Boston Strangler. And that was one of the first cases where we really saw law enforcement trying something new.
Yes, that police commissioner came out of the blocks with some ideas, and I think he really was trying to be forward-thinking in techniques and things like that, and it helped.
Well, in part 2, we're going to dive a bit more into the investigation, what was actually being done, how it was being ran. We're going to talk more about Elliot Ness's role. I'm just trying to get kind of through some of the basics with episode 1, but part 2 is going to be a little bit, more in that arena. Now, on September 10th of 1936, a 25-year-old African-American man from St. Louis, who just happened to be, kind of coming through town, his name was Jerry Harris. He was waiting to hop a freight train near a stagnant waterway, referred to as a creek in Kingsbury Run. It was near East 37th Street. And that's when he caught the sight of 2 halves of a male torso, just sort of floating in this waterway. It looks to me more like a pond.
Okay, I was going to say it sounds more like a ditch, a big ditch to me, but
yeah, it's just sort of a
where
big
water
hole with
ends
some
up.
Water. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Now, I've seen it referred to as a creek, and I guess people in the area were calling it a creek. This ain't no creek. This is like a big fucking stagnant pond of muck.
Yeah. In our parts, a creek needs to be fresh flowing water, buds. And you got a creek, and you got a brook, and then you have a stream. I'm not sure exactly
If
what
you're real
order
country,
that
it's
has.
a creek.
A creek? Yeah.
Now, the body part was sort of swirling and bobbing up and down in this water. And he sees this. Of course, he's like, that's not normal, right? And that is when he runs to the nearby Saucony Vacuum Oil Company, where he located a storage clerk. The clerk was a man named Leo Fields, and he asked Fields to contact police, explained he had found what he believed was a body floating in the water. Near a large tunnel where water poured into a 20-foot deep pool, small bits of human flesh were stuck to the ledge.
Oh my gosh.
So it appeared that this was the spot where the killer had thrown the pieces over the edge down into this water hole.
I'll have you know
Pond.
that's a damn creek.
Well, people keep calling it a creek, Dylan. So after police examined the area, it was decided that the man had probably been dead about 3 to 4 days. The fire rescue squad arrived, and they started using grappling hooks to drag the water, hoping they might recover more remains. After switching to ceiling hooks, they managed to snare both lower halves of the legs, so from like the knee down.
Oh, wow.
They found 2 legs. Dragging operations continued with a small boat borrowed from the Coast Guard, but no more remains were located at the time. Residents on the edges of Kingsbury Run were restless and scared. 5 bodies had been found in the space of a year with little evidence and no viable suspects. Now the killer had dumped a 6th victim. Hundreds of onlookers gathered to watch police at work. Police did locate some clothes at the scene, including a denim work shirt, a gray felt hat with a black band, and a 12 by 16 inch piece of faded green fabric that appeared to be underwear. And it had JW like marked on the waistband. They called it a laundry mark.
Oh, okay.
So I'm assuming a couple of the items would be laundry marked with initials. So I'm assuming that this was something back in the day if you took your laundry to like a laundromat or something.
So they know whose clothes are whose.
Yeah.
Okay.
It made me feel like I was in the military. That's the only time I've ever had to like stamp my name in my underwear.
Well, I was going to say that would lead me to think of like some kind of dorm housing situation or jail, or maybe even if it's gear, that work gear, that they've given you some kind of uniform.
The shirt was found wrapped in newspaper along the banks of the waterway where police assumed the body had been dumped, kind of in the same area. The shirt was bloodstained and had knife cuts at the neck. The hat had a label from Loudy's Smart Shop in Bellevue, Ohio. On the day before Harris's discovery, rail workers had been down in that area scouting for some stolen wire, but they did not see the body. That same evening, 2 railroad switchmen had seen a truck parked just kind of above with lights on. And they believe that was where the body had been tossed in, and they happened to see a truck parked up there. So police are like, okay, well, that could have been the killer, but that's still not a lot to go on.
No, it's not. No, there was some random truck with a light on.
They keep searching this area around this pool, but they didn't find any more clues. Pathologists estimated the victim was about 5'10" and weighed 145 pounds and was somewhere between 25 and 30 years old. The head had been severed from the body with 2 cuts around the 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae. The torso was bisected above the navel, slicing the stomach and kidneys in the process. The victim had also been emasculated. About 1 inch of his penis remained in the groin area. All the dismemberment had taken place with few or no hesitation marks, noted the pathologist. The victim's heart showed he had still been alive when the killer began to dismember the body.
My God.
Now, a profile began to emerge of the killer, and this is what police start to consider, that the murderer had to be a powerfully strong man with knowledge of human anatomy. So again, they're speculating that he was a butcher or some kind of medical professional. But without arms and a head, the 6th victim, it would be impossible to identify the 6th victim. So the futile search to recover the head went on for a month. Arrangements were made to bring in a veteran marine diver to go into this dark pool of water. In spite of the dangers of rocks and rubbish in this pond, a diver spent 5 hours along the bottom of the pool and even went into the tunnel where the water was discharged from.
Oh my gosh.
All through the day, morbid onlookers circled around to watch the investigation. And this went on for like days as they're combing the pond.
Yeah, everybody wanted to be there when they find something else.
So they said cars backed up about a half mile in both directions trying to see this crime scene. And that about an estimated 100,000 people came through or came by to see the crime scene.
100,000?
Yes. And nearly 1,400 vehicles passed by trying to catch a glimpse of the police at work.
My gosh. I mean, even for onlookers, that seems excessive.
Then people wandered over to the morgue hoping to view body parts until Coroner Pierce angrily closed the place to quote these tourists.
Hey, y'all got any body parts in there? I mean, it's one thing to be nosy, but damn, people, get the hell out of the way. And they certainly, outside of, I'm sure, the taped off area, they're certainly completely destroyed any scene integrity outside of the, right there around the pond or ditch or creek or however you view this body of water. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, come on. I can see me just trying to get to work. Like, what the hell's happening? Has there been an accident? Somebody hurt? And it's just damn rubberneckers trying to see them pull another hand out of this damn ditch.
It's a lot.
Seemed like a lot.
These people obviously did not have Netflix.
There was not a lot of options for entertainment.
There was not streaming services available to them. The city was reeling from the discovery of what seemed to be the 6th decapitation victim. On Monday, September 14th, 10-year-old Andrew Larned and his 6-year-old brother David stumbled upon some human bones sticking out above the ground in an East Cleveland field as they walked home from school. The scared boys ran to their father and older brother, who returned to the area. When police arrived, they found a woman's skeleton minus the skull buried in a small open box about a foot beneath the ground. Yet the intensity died down when a school teacher came forward and said he had actually inherited this skeleton from his father-in-law back in 1934. Some of the bones were wired together. And he described the bones, and they're like, okay, yeah, this is the body. The man, the school teacher, claimed that he had paid a few neighborhood boys to bury the skeleton. He was moving to Lakewood and didn't want to be bothered with taking the skeleton along with him.
So this is one of those like anatomy skeletons that you would see in science classes or a medical university.
Yes.
Okay.
And he didn't want it and just asked these boys to please go bury this.
Oh my gosh, dude. I would have bought that.
I know, me too.
And I would have honored those remains, and they sure as hell wouldn't be in the dirt.
A pump, so that happens. They're thinking it's another body, but it's not. And
Well, it was, but not of the
well,
killer.
not of the killer. You know what I'm saying? A pump was brought in to drain the pond where victim number 6 had been found. So the fire chief that had come and started to drain this pond, I don't know if it's like he was just so committed to his job or what the deal was, but he was like, we're going to keep dredging this pond and we're doing everything we can. He really thought there were going to be more remains in the pond. So this is after some, weeks had passed. I mean, they're dredging this thing for like a month. He brings in a pump, and that one's not strong enough. He has to borrow another pump. I mean, he's really going all out here. But by the time they get the pool down to about 2 feet of water and just some foul sludge, there's nothing to show for it. Nothing else has been found.
So do you think he thought there were maybe multiple victims' remains in this pond? Or he just wanted to recover every piece of the one victim?
I'm not
we don't
sure.
know.
He was just very dedicated to, we're going to see what's in the bottom of this pond.
Okay.
But it was so shitty, just the crap that was in the bottom of this pond, that every pump they would bring in, it
couldn't pump it out.
It would break it.
It's too sludgy.
Exactly. And so even with the second bigger pump they brought in, I mean, they could only get it down to 2 feet of water because it was just so nasty.
Well, that makes sense.
It was speculated the missing body parts had not been thrown into the pond with the torso. The missing arms and head would never be found despite the continued work pumping the water and digging through muck.
And I bet it smelled too. You know how stagnant water is?
Oh no. One of the books I was reading was describing it as it was very foul.
Yeah.
Just the nastiest, sludgy, just gross.
And at that point, it's going to be basically like a slurry, not even a pure liquid or a pure solid at this point, kind of in the middle of both. And it's just,
It sounds like it's just kind of shit water, bud.
Yeah. That's pretty tough.
A week after Harris discovered the body, police thought the victim might be a missing man named Patrick Casey. The 28-year-old section hand for the New York Central Railroad, who was from Youngstown, Ohio, had vanished from his hotel room at the Congress Hotel and had left behind a $25 paycheck. He was known to frequent Kingsbury Run, for all the entertainment it offered.
Yeah.
Booze and gambling and ladies.
And companionship.
But they were unable to confirm if this was Casey, and it seemed like the lead didn't really go anywhere, and I don't think he ever reappeared. So
all they know is that dude went missing, left a paycheck on the table, and was never seen again.
yeah, and I tried to look up information about him, couldn't really find anything.
Well, that's very strange to leave money on the table, even if you're
Especially
leaving.
during the Great Depression.
And yeah.
During hard economic times. You're not just going to leave your $25 paycheck.
No, and if you are leaving, you want every dime of money that you can muster up.
Detectives became convinced the killer must live in the vicinity of Kingsbury Run. Police concentrated their focus to that neighborhood and just the surrounding areas. Hand-picked members of the department hid in bushes, hoping to see abnormal activity or to catch the suspect in the act.
Okay,
Like, they're so desperate, they are planting officers in bushes. Like, hey, you just hide here all night and let me know if you see a body being dumped.
It's almost like in the Atlanta child murders case when they start staking out all the various bridges on this river.
That's exactly what it made me think of.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Railroad workers in Kingsbury Run grew increasingly apprehensive. Some car inspectors started working in pairs for protection. Railroad police worked on incoming train traffic, regarding each hobo as a potential killer or potential victim. Some inhabitants spoke of a vagrant man who lived under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge, who surrounded his den with between 400 to 500 pairs of women's shoes.
Okay.
They were like, this guy's really odd.
That-
He has a collection of women's shoes all around this bridge where he's living. Yeah. So law enforcement tried to track him down, but he managed to flee.
In high heels.
And all they found were a size 12 shoe print and some chicken feathers.
Damn chicken feathers again.
No.
Man, they need to DNA them damn chicken feathers, son.
Police searched through old files looking for similar killings and even revisited some crime scenes from the past. In 1928, a black, quote, voodoo man who was living on the East 40th Street had been charged with murder when authorities were told the man's dog had been playing with a human head in a yard. A headless corpse was discovered in the man's basement. Now, this is very strange, Dylan. I couldn't find his name because I wanted more information.
We'll just stick with Voodoo Man.
But the voodoo man was tried and acquitted because the identity of the remains were unknown.
What?
So...
I'm sorry.
Seriously, they tried this man for murder, but because they had never identified the remains, they didn't know who the victim was, they let him go. Because he's arguing that this headless corpse, it could just be anybody. It was in the basement when I moved here.
I'm taken aback. I can't believe that the identity of, I know it matters, but I can't believe it matters to the point where if you can't identify the victim that you caught me red-handed with, basically, it seems like you'd still catch a murder charge.
He's like, you can't prove I did something. You have proof that I'm the murderer? I mean, all you've got's a headless body in my basement. It could have been there for a long time.
Okay.
Look, I don't know, bud. I don't make the rules.
You may have had one of the greatest public defenders ever known to grace the courtrooms.
Maybe, or maybe the justice system is just as wacky as it is today.
Maybe if you dig
always
back
been fucked up.
in, Cleveland's court transcript vault, he put forth a very, very valiant case as to why he was not the killer. And it was one of the times that someone represented themselves and did a bang up job.
Because I said so.
Well, yeah, basically.
Does that work? Is that a good defense?
Well, I think you need to word it a little differently. Maybe find out some legal precedent to base your argument on, but that's a good place to start.
Similarly, in 1929, the remains of a mutilated, decapitated corpse was found in a field near East 40th and Woodland. Investigators looked into the release of perverts and sadists from all around public institutions in Ohio and surrounding areas, thinking that might offer up a lead or a suspect.
I'm here on behalf of the Cleveland Police Department. I know you're a recently released sadist, and I just wonder if you've been doing any sadist stuff, killing people.
Since becoming the safety director in December of 1935, Elliot Ness racked up a reputation for concentrating on illegal gaming operations, labor racketeering, and corruption within the police department. He remained distant from the murders until summer's end of 1936, when Mayor Burton summoned him. Let's be honest. Nobody wants to get summoned by the mayor.
Yeah, maybe you do.
I
Maybe
don't.
You've been waiting on it.
I don't. Have you met our mayor?
Oh, not here or shit. Not this mayor.
Are you kidding? Our mayor assaulted his opponent during the debate back in like October, like physically assaulted the guy on stage.
Yeah.
And then somehow got reelected.
Along with the entire town council that's ripped every bit of the heart and soul out of this place.
Yeah, my favorite is when they were asked, like, what have they actually done? And they said, well, we mulched the dog park. That was their big accomplishment for the year. Anyway, moving along. So, no, I don't want to be summoned to the mayor's office. He might punch me.
I wish he'd summon me up there. I'll fight our mayor for charity.
I think our mayor's a dumbass. Okay, so the killings prompted a detailed review of previous cases. So, again, they're going back. They're looking through cases dating all the way back to the 1920s. That murder in 1929, when they're finding a decapitated body, I mean, that almost seems like it could be related to this, right?
The Lady of the Lake, is that the one in 29?
No, that was in 34.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, but 29, I mean, that's just a few years, it's not that great of a, I guess, time period. So you could imagine maybe this mutilated, decapitated body found in 1929, that could be like the first time. And then there was a resting period or a cooling off period. And then it started back up and that the murderer was in full force.
Or maybe even other victims that have been undiscovered.
Right. So, okay, Ness gets summoned by the mayor. Let's move along here. The killings prompted a detailed review of the previous cases. Facing growing demands from the public, Mayor Burton was pressured to solve these murders. It was beginning to become something of a national disgrace. The Cleveland torso murderer just running rampant. All eyes are on Cleveland. Like, what are you doing to fix this?
Well, and in this era of yellow journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. This is continuing to be plastered all over headlines, constantly. It's not something, in this day and age, things come and go so quickly because we're getting inundated or whatever. We're getting a lot of information at once, and our attention spans are that of a gnat typically in the public sector. But this is something, just that name alone, the Cleveland Torso Killer. I mean, that's very sensational.
Yet the lines between police chief and safety director hadn't exactly been drawn. So it was not really communicated who should be running the case. Should it be the police chief or should it be the safety director, right? So when the mayor calls in Elliot Ness, he basically tells him, like, look, we have a lot of pressure to get this solved. I need you to take over this torso murders case. So officially, Ness takes over on September 12th. And before this, it's been run by the Cleveland Police Department. They're putting all their time and energy and resources in it. But now, hey, we're giving this to the safety director.
Not only the safety director, the Elliot Ness.
Right. But you have to think about this, Dylan. Elliot Ness has no experience. He might have been a bang-up prohibition officer. He has no experience when it comes to solving a murder.
No, me and you discussed this, and I could see that being a big problem because now you're dealing with something completely different.
It's like a totally different kind of investigation.
Totally different mindset, totally different approach. And honestly, I think his reputation has preceded him in this respect. And that if Elliot Ness hadn't been the current public safety director, which is a strange title to me, they would have never handed this over to the public safety director. You see what I'm saying? The fact that it's the Elliot Ness with his history and impeccable integrity and bringing Al Capone down and all that mess, I think that's one of the reasons that he's being brought in.
Ness immediately ordered a major contingent of police to Kingsbury Run, where they were dispatched to comb the jungle of dilapidated shanties, boxes, and old piano crates, and were told to round up anyone who seemed, quote, strange for questioning. The transient world had already started to spread. Word had started to spread among the transients who were hopping these box cars and kind of, traveling around. They already were saying, like, don't come to Cleveland. There's a mad butcher here. He's preying on hobos in the area. Vagrants had already begun leaving Kingsbury Run, and railroad police noted there were nearly no incoming traffic, as they called it, from hobos to the area.
Right.
That it was anyone they found on trains that were trying to leave.
Right.
They're trying to get the hell out of there. Ness combed through all the records associated with the murders and interviewed the main investigators who had been assigned to those cases. Whether he wanted it or not, Ness was now in charge of the Kingsbury Run murders. The sixth victim offered the press a lot to sensationalize. And for some reason, they really kind of honed in on this sixth victim. And maybe it was because they had this pool that they were focusing so heavily on draining. And it was, you had all these people coming out. It was like a big deal. A lone butcher was stalking the city, and the ongoing search for body parts in that stagnant pool gave the people a tangible focus, and also the news. They could be out there every day getting pictures of these cranes and all this equipment being used. And then, of course, the thousands of looky-loos
it's
who
quite
are coming out every day.
It's a spectacle.
The press called the victims, quote, the headless dead, which is pretty tasteless. Every segment of society was impacted by the murders. The realization there was a serial killer out there weighed heavily on everybody. It wasn't just a hobo problem at this point.
Well, it's scary.
And I think everyone's starting to realize that, hey, wait a minute. This isn't just this little group of vagrants. This is happening in our city, and it could be any one of us.
Right.
Because we don't even have the identity of these victims.
And it's continuing to happen, and the police seem powerless, at least at the moment, to stop it.
During the summer of 1936, 25 detectives were assigned to the case full-time. Now, this was mostly due to public outcry, and eventually these detectives would kind of slowly be taken off the case, but this was sort of a big show that the mayor wanted. Detective Peter Merlo was assigned to the case full-time along with Elliot Ness. He would be one of the lawmen most associated with the Cleveland torso murders. Merlo migrated from the Ukraine as a teenager. He joined the army during World War I, but never saw combat. In 1919, he entered the police force as a crossing guard and had worked his way up. He had been assigned to the Roaring Third before becoming the lead investigator on the murder case. He was allowed to work any hours necessary and also pick anyone he wanted for a partner. Murillo, I think I called him Merlo a minute ago. Murillo spoke 7 Eastern European languages, which the police chief considered this would be a great asset, Dylan. He would be a great asset, not a liability, because he spoke all these languages. And Kingsbury Run was heavily populated with immigrants.
7? Shit, just the fact this guy knows 7 languages means he's freaking smart in my book, bud.
Murillo agreed to take Martin Zalewski, a 23-year veteran of the police force, to be his partner. That's who the police chief suggested he work with, even though he could pick anyone he wanted. And Murillo said, hey, if this is your guy, you think he's solid, that's fine. I just want somebody that's going to do the job. Zalewski was also multilingual and could converse with the large immigrant population that was in Kingsbury Run as well. So you have these 2 guys, and they're going to be able to speak to the Hungarian population, as I mentioned, which was huge in this area, and all of the other folks.
And at least 6 other groups.
The new partners worked day and night, often on their own time, reading through hundreds of pages of files and familiarizing themselves with all aspects of the case. The police chief told Murillo, quote, I have faith in you. If you don't find the killer, no one else will. He really believed that this guy would be the one to solve it. Ness met with Murillo 3 days later to discuss details of the case. And despite the fact that Murillo had barely enough time to read through all of the official documentation, Ness was demanding to know what progress had been made so far. He told Ness, of course, Murillo's like, dude, I just got assigned to the case.
Yeah, bro, chill, bro.
But he told Ness, I had little time to absorb these files, but at the end of the day, he felt the crimes were sex crimes.
Now, do you think in Ness's case, this is him just being Ness, a hard at, kind of expecting perfection from everyone around him, just like he expects from himself? Or do you think this is him kind of in his ego and being threatened by Murillo?
I think it's maybe the latter.
Yeah, I know, because it seems like he's a reasonable, logical guy, someone who's just been put on this huge case with all this information. I mean, it's all analog information. You got to literally go through it page by page. It's unreasonable to think that he's absorbed all that and has actually even made a plan.
Murillo was described as a cop's cop, totally professional, dedicated, tough, and incorruptible. So in ways, he's actually very much like Elliot Ness.
He's a Cleveland version of Ness, homegrown.
He valued investigative work over people who tested like into promotions. He felt like, a test shouldn't be what qualifies you to become a detective or to get promotion, that it should be based on your work.
Your experience
and what
and
you
history
can,
of
and what you can produce.
Okay.
Not only was he skilled, in just like basic detective work, but he was also the force's pistol champion.
So he's a marksman as well.
On the other hand, Murillo was described as a sensitive gentleman who held a lifelong love for the violin. Murillo had little use for the political pressures placed on the police department and entered into a public arena that would become highly politicized. For him, politics and police work did not mix. He was a bulldog who gave 200% and had little tolerance for officers who only gave 100%.
Okay.
Peter did not like Elliot Ness. Murillo just didn't like him. Murillo's blunt manner and tendency to speak his mind, no matter what, of course, did not sit well with local government or many within the police department. When someone spoke with authority on the case, Murillo would often hiss at them, "Were you there, Charlie?" So anytime there was a press conference and some detective would start talking about the murders, like they really knew what was happening, he would be like, "Oh, you were there?" and just call people out. So you can see that he and Elliot Ness are probably not going to get along.
Yeah, it's true.
Murillo followed his own instincts no matter where they led and was kind of known for some unorthodox police work. He was a vice cop who'd worked vice too long. That's how his family described him. He saw the world in terms of the people he dealt with. And so he kind of looked at everything from an angle of, people are inherently bad.
Right.
What are they doing? What are they up to, kind of thing. And he almost had what would be an obsession with what he judged to be sexual perversions and the people who were sex perverts.
But his opinion of that.
Yes. And though he was an excellent detective with top-notch police work, some prosecutors were afraid to put him on the stand for their fear that his rough language would shock jurors because he spoke so plainly. Despite the facade, Murillo was known to be a deeply religious and compassionate man at heart. He had actually spent some time considering priesthood in his youth, but due to the horrors he witnessed daily, he was extremely protective of his family. And when it came to crimes against children, Murillo was fiercely professional and dedicated, almost as if he took these cases personally. And his daughter described it as he used superhuman strength to solve them.
Okay. Well, I like that.
So a man after your heart, Dylan.
Don't mess with the damn kids, y'all, or the women.
By summer's end, law enforcement knew they needed to think of the investigation in non-traditional terms. These murders did not have what they considered traditional motives of greed, anger, lust, revenge. So the idea that these victims were murdered by a total stranger for no reason at all was really hard for them to understand.
Right, and then cut up like this and posed around, and their body all this stuff being done with their body post-mortem. It's very strange.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing they had to go by was like the Jack the Ripper case.
Right.
Like 50 years earlier.
Yeah, in another continent.
So they were just struggling, and they knew they needed to think outside the box, Dylan, because the old ways were not working, but it seemed no one knew what the new ways were supposed to be.
Well, yeah.
And that's where we're going to end this episode. I know it's been a long one. Part 2, we're going to deliver more victims, and we're going to talk more about Elliot Ness, the investigation. We're kind of going to get into the heart of this battle between Elliot Ness and Peter Murillo.
I was not aware.
How that's going to impact. And honestly, how this huge serial killer case would go on to impact the lives and careers of many who were involved.
This has been an amazing story. I had no idea about any of this. And I'm very surprised about Murillo entering the scene because I thought Ness would get to be the big gun in this. So that's very interesting to see how that plays out. And so at this point, we're at 6 victims. Is that right?
6 victims.
6 victims, 2 identified, 4 not.
Yes.
And the cops basically have absolutely no leads, even though they've been basically throwing all their resources and manpower and everything again at it, and they're getting nowhere.
Yep.
So now he's brought in, Ness was already there, but he's being handed the reins. At the same time, this bit of a superstar detective, a local homegrown
Will
boy,
officially be taking over.
will be officially taking over as well. Wow. Man.
It's going to be quite interesting, Dylan.
I know why you've been in your she cave all this time working on this, because this is an amazing story. You really done an incredible job.
Thank you, Dylan.
And I'm being honest.
I know it's been lengthy. I'm starting to lose my voice. So we're going to wrap it up, and we'll bring you part 2 here in a few days.
All right.
You ready for that, Dylan?
I appreciate that.
Thanks for listening, y'all.
Yep. You keep on listening, and we'll keep on talking.
Bye.
Bye.